Well, hey, man, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
You bet, gladly.
So let's get into your life of coaching and being a transformational mindset master here and helping people get to a better place. And one of the biggest shifts that we went through, 4.5 years ago or so, was the whole COVID thing. And I know we're getting fatigued by talking about it, but it was such a big deal and it shifted so much for us. How did you make it through that time period? And how much of living through that has reverberated into what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. So I was a coach before COVID. So I used to be a college professor. When my students were graduating, they had no idea what to do in the market. So I actually started coaching initially to work with my students. I went back into corporate work. But another important part of the story for me is I had gotten caught up in cycles of addiction, and my life came crashing around me in 2019. And just as I was starting to put my life back together, COVID happened.
Yep.
And so not only was I, like, for a variety of reasons, I wasn't still working in the consulting field. I had been an executive at General Dynamics. I left there. And so COVID was an opportunity not only to put my life back together, to begin the path of personal development that I'm excited to be on, but also to say, how can I be of service to the world? And coaching was the most obvious way to do that. And so, my own journey is through the rooms of recovery, but also just through the process. That really there's kind of four steps to it. One is we realize there's something bigger than us. We're not helpless, but we're powerless over most things.
Yeah.
And what that allows us to do is shine a really bright light of focus on the things we have control over. And then we come back into reconciliation with ourselves. Then we come back into reconciliation with others. And then we begin to build systems to repeat that. And so in some ways, my coaching with executives and entrepreneurs is really just taking the best of recovery and figuring out how to make a model out of it.
So if we put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids right now, it's career day, they're third graders, 10, 11-year-olds, and the kid in the back of the room is like, hey, what do you do for a living? What's your
Mhm.
answer?
I help people change.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream? Ideal life.
No, it's a great question, actually, because this is something I do with some of my clients, because oftentimes hidden in that question are the things that we thought were going to be true of our lives. There's really a key to our authentic self in the answer to that question. And in third grade, I was trying to decide if I wanted to be a chef or a comedian.
Okay. That's awesome.
And it's interesting because I came back to that exercise and that question and said, okay, what about that resonates with what I do today? And so the chef, I don't know if you've ever worked in a kitchen, but a kitchen is the perfect demonstration of interdependence.
Yeah.
There is no single kitchen that one person can run well.
Yeah.
Even in small kitchens, there's a restaurant in New York that my wife and I like to go to, and it's it's the highest end hole in the wall you can ever find. There are three people who work there, but even there, they all have to work together to make it work. And so that chef idea really is carried forward into all the work I do on interdependence, helping people figure out how to work together, how to create systems of mutual dependence. And I think the comedian just shows up in the fact that I get tons of spiritual energy being in front of people, explaining big ideas. Even when I was consulting full time, most of my work was going out and explaining to clients what was happening in their business. Certainly as a college professor and now as a speaker, author, and coach, I spend a lot of time in front of people. And so I think that's where the roots came from.
But you know what's interesting about you asking people that and digging into it? This is the one question where everybody that does it, their eyes immediately go up and they get a smile, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
there's nothing more eternal and pure and innocent than that whole idea of what your dream was when you were a kid, because there's no fences. It's like literally the sky is the limit, and it's almost mimics people looking up thinking, wow, it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And what often happens, and it's interesting, I'm talking about this as well next week on my own podcast, is what often happens is we begin to tell ourselves stories trauma, family of origin, all the things that just all of life. We begin to tell ourselves these stories and we forget who we are. And so in some ways, like the greatest gift of coaching, and really just I think the greatest gift we can give other people is helping them come back into their authentic self.
It's almost like having a good conversation with an old friend. It kind of brings you back to that buoy in the water that always was a safe place that you kind of lose track of. Like you get lost. You don't have a compass. You may not even have a raft. You're just like
Mhm.
treading. So it's good, man. Um,
Yeah.
so where did these foundational elements begin for you? Take me back to where you were born and raised. How did you get this backbone to become a coach, be a
Mm.
professor, to be somebody that's leading people to a better place?
So I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up outside of New York City, but when I was 18, I came to the South for college and I fell in love with the South. I think in part because for all the problems, there was this sense of community and togetherness that I saw that I hadn't seen, maybe not as clearly in urban New York City. Um, and that's really where my career began. I started my career in politics because I wanted to imagine a better world for the future. Now I think about it for my grandson, but at the time I was just thinking about future generations. And I pivoted from entrepreneurship into technology and from technology into entrepreneurship, or from rather from politics into technology into entrepreneurship. And my first company was actually a company called Smart Ministry, and it was we were what you would think of today as a SaaS product. We essentially aggregated all of the administrative needs of nonprofits into a single portal. And it was a good idea. It was a little ahead of its time. Like I was explaining to people who ran small nonprofits, in the late 90s, some of them weren't even on the internet yet. But, so much of my experience, my family of origin, and just the world I grew up in was saying, how can I be of service to the world and how can I bring people together? And so that's probably one of the more important questions that guides what I do. And then you throw in the experiences that I've had over the last, half a decade or more in recovery. And what you realize is that we are capable of greater things when we do it together. For
Yeah.
me, when I began the process of recovery, I was a pretty beat up person, but mostly me beating myself up. And I started to meet people who said, can we love you and believe in you until you can do that for yourself? And so in some ways, I view my life and my career and the things I spend my day doing is how do I pay back that? I call it emotional capitalism. Like
Yeah.
I had a bunch of people invest in me. They were emotional venture capitalists. They
Yeah.
invested in me when maybe I didn't seem like that good of an investment.
Yeah.
And now I get the opportunity to take their investment and 10x it in somebody else.
It's interesting about you talking about going down to the South. My dad was born in Brooklyn and raised in Long Island and got stationed here in Kansas City. And
Yeah.
and I hear this from a lot of people that come from the coasts. Once they come into the Midwest, there's a level of there's just a level of warmth. There's a level of people
Mhm.
that engage that's totally different from the coasts. And
Absolutely.
it's always cool. I mean, some people run back because they're like, all right, this is
Sure.
too much. Way too Leave It to Beaver. But then you got that group that's like, I mean, I've run into so many people. I remember probably 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing some volunteering at a place called Harvesters. It's a food bank here. And
Mhm.
I was with my son and his friend, and there was a dude from LA, and he was just like, I just can't get over how you guys talk to people. And I'm like, what are you
Right.
talking about? You know? He's like, this doesn't happen in LA. No one's
Yeah.
talking to each other. And I've been to New York enough, kind of tangentially enough to know that, yeah, there's a different flow. There's a different mentality.
Mhm.
Everybody's in their own zone. So yeah, um
Yeah.
it's
Very
interesting.
much so.
So
Mhm.
let me ask you this in recovery and even before that, you're obviously very highly driven. You have a vision for your life. Who has
Mhm.
been that inspirational force, that hero, that bedrock for you in your life?
Yeah, and I love that question. It's a question I often ask people as well. And probably the greatest inspiration for me right now is the individual who became my coach during the recovery process. Um, it's a strange, we're all addicted to something. We're addicted to the stories we tell ourselves, social media, power, fame, money, something. Um, and, you know, when I came in, yeah, I was very driven. I've been driven all my life, but my life looked more like a roller coaster. And I still remember this individual, one of the first questions they asked me is, what would it look like if you lived in between most of the time? You didn't have a lot of high highs, you didn't have a lot of low lows, but you were present. And what's fascinating about that, of course, if you study Buddhist philosophy or any of the sort of great traditions, that's one of the goals is how do we live in the present moment? We're not overly elated, we're not constantly depressed. And so that individual was a really powerful motivator for me. I will say, though, I was quite motivated by my dad. When he was 62, he retired, and he and my mom moved to Africa to do nonprofit work. So, like the time when most of his colleagues were going to the golf course, he's like, "No, I'm going to go keep being in service," and he moved to Southern Africa to serve others. So he continues to be a real strong motivator for me.
So I see all the books back there. What was your favorite book growing up? What was the seminal book in your life?
A seminal book in my life. Boy, I love books. And so that's like asking, people with 10 children what their favorite kid is.
Yeah.
Um, I was a huge C.S. Lewis fan. And so the Space Chronicles, the Chronicles of Narnia, and all that stuff, I think that really awakened my imagination, and what could be true. Yeah, oh boy, that's such a hard question
Yeah.
because I had so many books that I loved and loved growing up. But yeah, probably C.S. Lewis and anything he wrote at the beginning. I was also a big fan of Tolkien, not surprisingly, all the Lord of the Rings books. I lived
Yeah.
in those for years.
So the one thing about going through difficult things like recovery and finding a new place and even having the strength to coach others is that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We have these people that we admire. If you could
Yeah.
meet one of those inspirational figures and forces on the planet right now that you look up to, maybe ask questions, see how they work, something that would help you on your path, who would that be?
Alive or dead? Is it
Yes, we
okay?
could do the ghosts. Yeah.
Okay. So The Ghost is easy, and that's Viktor Frankl. So Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Because of my addiction and because of the way I behaved, I actually got the gift of spending 5 weeks in jail, in the county jail. And there's not a lot to do. It's not prison, it's not Oz, but you're there with not a lot to do but read. And I happened to pick up a copy of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankl was a prisoner of war during Nazi occupation, and he kept scraps of notes hidden in his clothes to write this book when he got out. And there's so many great insights in the book, but his greatest insight is our greatest human freedom is the ability to choose our attitude in any given situation. And I kind of figured if somebody who was in the middle of Nazi occupation can say that, I can say that in any circumstance I ever find myself in. I've never been in anything like that. So I would say, if I were to pick somebody who has passed already and I could meet them, it would probably be Frankel. In terms of living, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. I love the work she does, and I think she is a pace setter and a trendsetter for vulnerability and the way we can be.
Yeah.
Right now we're in a lot of chaos culturally. Everybody's trying to figure out what's coming next. And I think the answer to that can be a place where we're more vulnerable, more authentic. We're able to show up as our true selves. And
Yeah.
Brene is certainly somebody that has led the path on that.
So every day you wake up, you have a motivation to live this life that you have. But, you're dealing with some heavy stuff, helping people, coaching them to a better place.
Mhm.
But you have to evolve as a human being. What gets
Right.
you up every day and what makes you operate at a high level to do everything that you want to get done?
Yeah. So most people think of starting over later in life as a downfall. It's been my greatest strength.
Yeah.
So I rebooted my life at 55, And I just assumed that was half point. So I think I'm going to live to 110. So my real question is, how do I make the most impact on the world during the time I'm here? And the primary thing waking me up every day is helping. So my life goal, one of the things that I teach in my own coaching is we should have obituary goals. We should have things that we want to leave the world behind. And this is just Stephen Covey 101. And my obituary goal is I want to help bend the arc of human culture toward interdependence.
Yeah.
We think we're supposed to be these great independent people, but there is no self-made human. The example I always give when I'm talking about this is Steve Jobs. Steve, incredible, brilliant, visionary. If he had not met Tim Cook in 1998, maybe we'd remember him as that guy who had that thing once. But Tim Cook had the operational capacity to actually take Jobs' vision and turn them out. Johnny Ive also came along and said, oh, you want to create these things of beauty, here's how you can produce them. And so what wakes me up in the morning is imagining that when I leave this planet, the world will be a little bit more interdependent than when I came on.
Yeah. So the one thing too about changing your life is that there's a level of risk that we all have to take. What's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest risk that you've taken in your life?
Yeah, the biggest risk I would say, being vulnerable and trusting that I'm safe when I do that. So a lot of my work is around sharing my own experience, sharing some negative things that have happened to me, even in my writing, in my speeches. I often talk about, I'm willing to share my valley moments, those times when things were dark. And that feels risky. It's why many of us don't do that, because it seems like, if I say that, what will people think of me? The good news is when you've had a true bottom moment, you're less likely to worry about what people are going to think about you and more likely to ask, how can I serve the world? How can I be of value to the people first in my network? So that's my family, my community. I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a very community-oriented city. But then, to North Carolina, to the US, to the world, how can I be of service?
So what was the moment, what was the client that you knew that coaching was your path? Did you have an epiphany like that?
I did, and it was actually even before recovery. What I had a particular student who was um, had been a double major, so they could have gone two different directions. They weren't exactly sure what to do, and through my counsel and the counsel of others, they were able to find their way into law school. And I think it was 2 years ago, I got a message from them saying, "I just made partner." And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's it. And this particular person works in environmental law, kind of helping ensure that we leave a better planet behind. And that was such a huge affirmation. But I would say too, even in coaching now, I have these single affirmations, these moments where I'm coaching an individual, and then we get back together weeks or months later, or a month later, and I see real change. And again, that's something they did, but I'm blessed to have played a small part in it.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into a much younger version of you, an 18-year-old version of you. You can give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated over time. What advice would you give your young self? What would you tell them?
Listen to your inner coach, not your inner critic.
Yeah.
So much of my struggle in life has been I knew intuitively there was something I could do that would make the world a better place. And mostly what kept me from that was the voice in my head saying, too hard, not enough time, not enough skill. As I've leaned into the world of possibility and relied more heavily on my inner coach and learned over time how to quiet the voice of my inner critic, I've seen the capacity to do things that eluded me for years. And I've built a team around me to help me do that too. And so I think if I could go back and talk to that 18-year-old, I would say, You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And if you're willing to listen to yourself, your heart, your intuition, you're going to make a big mark in the world.
So you had mentioned this idea of interdependence, which I find fascinating as a sports fan. You know, when you
Yeah,
look at like the mechanism of like baseball, like those
sure.
guys can hit as many home runs as they can, but if they sit back and watch that bullpen crumble, it's bad,
Right.
right? It's like,
Right.
where did
Right.
our lead go? So it really
Mhm.
is, it kind of comes down to that. You talked about the kitchen. In the life that you've lived and the amount of people that you've seen come together in groups, what is one of the
Mhm.
more poetic, beautiful groups of people that come together to accomplish something together? What do you admire the most in that realm?
So, probably the most compelling interdependence story is the nonprofit I've been a part of for 20 years. So, um, in the fall of 2004, a group of us were sitting around a campfire in Glorieta, New Mexico, and saying, why is it so hard to help people in need? Like, why is there so many barriers? You know, you give $1 to the United Way and you're lucky if 50 cents goes to it. And so we said, well, what could we try? And so we put together a concept that eventually came to be called Common Change, which said, what if we put together our funds and also gave what we had of ourselves to the effort? So I was the original chief technology officer for the effort, for example. What could we do? And in 20 years, we've given away a few $1 million and done it without any administrative oversight or administrative costs. So we have a one-to-one relationship. When somebody gives a dollar of that goes to help somebody in need.
That's wonderful. So, of everything that you've done and evolved into in your life, of all of it, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
That's a fun question because I don't think often in those terms. Probably, I would say what I'm proudest of is the capacity to pull my life back together.
Yeah.
You know, I have a before and after picture of myself from more than 5 years ago, and then myself today, and you wouldn't even recognize me. And I'm careful because I don't mean this in kind of a narcissistic way, but I'm proud of the recovery because what it speaks to is not just my effort, but to the effort of all the people around me whose lives I've also been involved in. So I'm not simply saying, look, I did something great myself. That's not true at all. What I'm saying is that a group of us together were able to accomplish some really meaningful things. And one example of that is the fact that 5 years ago, I was, sitting by the side of, well, 6 years ago, I was sitting by the side of the road, having just caused a DUI and not sure whether I was even going to ever do anything of substance. And today I've got some really meaningful things that I'm putting out into the world, and I'm excited about that.
So at the end of the day, well, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone around you, that you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, I think I'm the best sous chef in the kitchen. So,
Yeah.
uh, I can be the executive chef when I need to be, but what I have excelled at over the years is being able to kind of understand situationally what's needed at the time and being able to prepare the conditions for that to happen. And I think most people would agree with that. Even when I've had my own companies, I've usually looked to somebody else either as the COO or the director, sort of day-to-day directing. That's not my strength, but I think what people recognize is that I have the capacity to see what needs to be done and build a team around me.
That's wonderful. So, Will, if anyone wants to hire you, they have questions, they want to reach out, any of the good work you're doing, where do they go?
They go to Will Samson, and there is no P in Samson, willsamson.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on all the other places, but willsamson.com is the best launching point. You'll find everything there.
Okay, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. We'll get it out there. Well, this has been a delight. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. I love the indomitable strength of the human spirit to get to that better place because the story's never over until it's over. So
Absolutely.
it's wondrous. Thank you, Will. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.